Hey, what's up guys, Safe here, and in this video we're going to talk about the interactions with X Marks the Spot. So just to recap about the mechanics for X Marks the Spot. X Marks the Spot is undispellable, but does not pierce through spell immunity, and you're unable to return invulnerable units and magic immune units. So going for items that actually are able to disrupt the X Marks the Spot, the first one we'll talk about is Yule Scepter. If you currently Yules yourself while X Marks the Spot is on you, and the opponent tries to return you while you're in air from the Yules, they'll be unable to do so. Now what you're looking to do ideally when you have the Yule Scepter is wait 1.5 seconds before you use it, or maybe I'd say 1.6 seconds, because the whole X duration lasts for 4 seconds, and the Yule Scepter fly time lasts around 2.5 seconds. So that means that if you actually wait 1.5 seconds into the X, and he doesn't commit anything or commit any spells, you're able to walk away and then cast the Yules after that, and you will actually be able to 100% get out of the X that way. But what you need to look out for is they can just cast the torrent on top of where you Yules and basically set up again in another way. So make sure you're far enough away before you actually try something like that. Or try to see if the Kunkka actually commits his mana to the X combo, because if he doesn't commit the torrent and he's just waiting for you to Yules yourself, and then he's going to torrent on top of that, you could just keep running and keep waiting until he actually commits mana and then commit your Yule Scepter. So another item we're going to talk about is the Black King Bar. So this one's a lot more straightforward. You get X Marks the Spot, and then you pop BKB to actually remove yourself from the X. Now what I see people do is they get X'd, and then some of them just pop it right away, or some wait a little bit and then pop it maybe halfway through the duration. So the BKB duration is always going to be longer than the X Marks the Spot duration, so it doesn't matter when you pop it, you'll automatically 100% get away from the X Marks the Spot. So another item that's going to be able to mess with X Marks the Spot is going to be Lotus Orb. Now this one actually doesn't negate it really in any way, but it does reflect it back on the Kunkka. Now after 4 seconds the Kunkka will be returned back to where he originally casted the X on you, but he will have his own X on top of him that he'll be actually shot back to. Now this will be an automatic 4-second X. You're actually not able to return it manually yourself, but you can set up abilities underneath it. Now the next item we're going to talk about is a very hard one to actually pull off, and that's going to be Manta Style. Now with Manta Style, as you actually cast the item and split into illusions, there's a 0.1 second moment of invulnerability that you have. Now if you actually time this with when the return is pulled and Manta correctly, you'll be actually able to dodge the return. Now for some abilities that are actually able to disrupt X Marks the Spot, the first one we have is Juggernaut Blade Fury. Now this one's pretty straightforward. You get X'd, and then you cast the Blade Fury, and then you walk away, and you're unable to be returned since you're spell immune. Another one would be Omni-Knight Repel. A target or yourself gets X Marks the Spot, you cast Repel on yourself or the unit who was X'd, and they're able to walk away. Lifestealer Rage. This one's also pretty straightforward, kind of like Juggernaut. They cast X Marks the Spot on you, and then you cast Rage and are able to walk away from it. Now one thing you want to keep in mind is Rage at level 1 actually isn't going to be long enough to get out of the X-Torn combo. So what you're going to have to do is wait a little bit before you actually commit your Rage. Maybe let the X run a second or 1.5 seconds. Another ability that works against X Marks the Spot is going to be a World Devourer's Astral Imprisonment. Now this works essentially where you or your teammate is going to get X Marks the Spot, and then you would cast Astral Imprisonment on whoever is affected by the X, and then they will not be returned to wherever the Kunkka set up the X originally. But what you do need to look out for, good Kunkkas will just set up their torrent and their combination on top of the Astral Imprisonment, so that way when the enemy does get out, since they won't be pulled back, they'll just get procced on top of the Astral Imprisonment. Now we're going to talk about some other abilities that are a little bit more technical and require you to have a lot better timing. There's little room for error with using these skills. So the first one we'll talk about is Shadow Demon's Disruption. This works pretty well against X Marks the Spot, but the duration of the imprisonment isn't too long, so the X Marks the Spot could actually still be effective when the person actually is out of the disruption. So you want to make sure that you're rather waiting long enough before you actually apply the disruption, so the X will run out. Another thing you have to be careful for is if you actually set up a disruption, the Kunkka can just set up the torrent on top of the disruption. Now another ability that works about removing the X Marks the Spot or negating the X Marks the Spot is going to be Bane's Nightmare. And how this basically works is when Nightmare is initially casted, there'll be a 1-second timing of invulnerability. Now how you actually are going to use this to negate the X Marks the Spot is in the time zone where the Kunkka is going to return you, you would sleep yourself so that the Kunkka's return is actually negated and you're actually able to walk away scot-free. Now aside from the defensive aspects, these skills and items can also be used to be offensive, and what that means is if the Kunkka is Xing himself to walk to the creep waves and right click and push out the creep waves, or he's Xing one of his allies to actually send them in and, push out waves or do damage or do structural damage or whichever it is, you can actually use these abilities in the Shadow Demon's Disruption, Bane's Nightmare, the Yule Scepter, and Astral Imprisonment can all be used to negate the Kunkka's X in a way where you can use it to set up a fight for yourself. So if Kunkka X's himself and walks up to the creep wave, you use any of these abilities or the Yule Scepter, and the Kunkka will not be returned to the safe point where he initially thought he would be returned to. He'll actually end up just staying right where he is, where you casted your ability or the Yules, and then you'll be able to actually aggress him like that. Now this works in the scenarios where, an enemy hero would think they're safe just trying to rat and split push with X saving them, and then you would come up with this ability or with the Yule Scepter and then disrupt them and then try to get the kill from there. Now also remember that when X Marks the Spot is actually used on an ally hero, it doesn't last 4 seconds, it'll last 8 seconds. So you're going to have to wait longer before you're actually able to get in the parameters where the Kunkka won't get automatically pulled back. You need to have the Kunkka or his ally crowd controlled in the parameters of when the X Marks the Spot will end, or long enough so the Kunkka won't be able to return himself manually or return his ally manually. So some other abilities that are good against Kunkka's X and Torn combination. Another one we'll talk about is going to be Tusk's Snowball. So Tusk's Snowball will actually keep you unable to be returned. So what this means is Snowball will last for 3 seconds and the X Marks the Spot lasts for 4 seconds. So if you're casting your Snowball anywhere after 1 second, you'll be fully invulnerable to the return and won't be able to get returned on top of the torrent. But what a good Kunkka can do is just set the torrent on when your Snowball will land. Now this is kind of hard to do, but it can be done. Another one that's really good at dodging X Marks the Spot is going to be Puck's Phase Shift. Now this is the same thing as all the other ones. You need to be careful because the duration of Phase Shift is not longer than the duration of X Marks the Spot. So there are still parameters that you can be pulled back on, so you need to be careful for that. Another one is going to be Storm Spirit Ball Lightning. While Storm Spirit is actually using his Ball Lightning, he's going to be invulnerable. So if you could set this up on when that return is actually going to proc, then you can actually dodge it entirely. Another hero that is good with dealing with X is going to be Phantom Lancer. He's able to use his Doppelganger to phase out of the X Marks the Spot pullback. And basically how this works is when the pullback is going to happen, he uses his Doppelganger, and the target will then be invulnerable when he's in that moment of being phased in the Doppelganger. And if you're able to time this with when the return is going to happen, you'll be able to successfully dodge it. Another one is going to be Ember Spirit's Sleight of Fist, and also his active Fire Remnant ability. So how this would work is, if you have a lot of creeps and a lot of targets around the Ember Spirit that you're actually able to proc with your Sleight of Fist, you'll have longer time in an invulnerable state because your hero will have to go and right click through all of the enemies nearby in the AoE. So what you want to do is try to see how many creeps you have. More creeps obviously would mean more time. You get X Marks the Spot, wait a little bit, and then cast your Sleight of Fist, and try to time the range when you're going to be invulnerable with when the return will happen, and then you'll negate the X Marks the Spot in that way. Now another thing you can do is have your Remnant somewhere, and then as the X is going to return you, try to have it so you return yourself as it's about to proc, and the pullback will happen, and that way you can be in an invulnerable state of moving yourself to a Remnant, and then while you're obviously moving yourself, you'll be invulnerable in that small parameter, and that's long enough for it to actually be dodged. So some illusion type spells that are actually able to dodge X Marks the Spot. It's going to be kind of similar to Manta, but a little bit easier because you'll have more time of invulnerability. Now the first one we'll talk about is Naga Siren. When you use Naga Siren Split, she'll have a small window of invulnerability. If you're actually able to hit that window of invulnerability when the pullback occurs, you'll successfully dodge it. Now the same thing goes for Chaos Knight. His ultimate ability will have him split into illusions, and then while he's splitting, he will be invulnerable at this time. If you also pair this up with the pullback timing, you'll actually be able to dodge it successfully. Now another one that's pretty hard to do but can work is Monkey King. Monkey King can successfully dodge out of the X, but what it requires you to do is when you're X'd, go ahead and jump up to a tree and then start casting your Primal Spring and let it go off pretty much all the way. Now, if you're able to jump from a tree to the ground with your Primal Spring and be leaping in the air as you get pulled back, you'll get pulled back first and then end up landing where the Primal Spring originally was intended to go. So these are some heroes that actually are unable to dodge it. So Queen of Pain with her Blink ability won't be able to dodge it. Anti-Mage with his Blink ability won't be able to dodge it. Monkey King just jumping from tree to tree won't be able to dodge it. And a lot of other mobility abilities that don't provide invulnerability won't be able to dodge it. Ultimately, the only way you can get away with those type of heroes is if there's a long enough window in between the Kunkka's CC chain that allows you to get off your cast animation to get these spells off, which actually does happen more often than not. So if a Kunkka ever leaves like a 0.5 second leeway and returns early, you'll actually be able to get these spells off. And that's why it's very important that you really cut the time that the heroes are actually able to, get these spells off. And by doing this, you just have to really have a perfect CC chain and really know when to pull that target back on top of your CC. Alright guys, so to sum it up, these tips and tricks are really helpful, and you should definitely keep them in mind hand in hand when you're learning this hero, and always in the pubs or games that you're going to be playing, because these will dictate pretty much the parameters of how you're going to be able to get kills, who you can and can't engage on, and all the little tips and tricks in between there to successfully get your abilities off, whether you have to hold out a little bit on returning someone, or you know that if you go to return them, they have these means of actually escaping them, and what are those means. And also, some little further things to think about is when they actually use these abilities to get out of your X, instead of actually committing your torrent, you could wait for these things and, maybe use the pump fake method and things like that. Try to get them to commit their ability without using your torrent. And then what you can do is set up your other abilities on top of things like Astral Imprisonment or the Bane Sleep or anything like that. Alright guys, thanks for watching. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to place them down below, and I'm definitely looking forward to getting back to them.